team. So, okay, spook fans, this is the moment where, every year people anticipate, what is Steve going to say about the Capitol ghosts? Because these are stories that have been passed down over generations, and various sightings have been seen of the demon cat and other activities. And nobody tells a story better than Steve Livengood. Steve Livengood is the Capitol Historical Society's treasurer. He has been doing tours of the Capitol for almost 25 years for the Capitol Historical Society. We will be celebrating his 25 years of service with us in March, so look forward to that festive activity. But today he's going to take us through the haunts of the Capitol and tell us what is really there that you don't see right away, but is somehow available as you walk through the Capitol. So Steve, take us on a tour of the unknown.
Thank you, Jane. The ghosts have been regularly interfering with my attempt to present this program. This is the spookiest looking picture I could find of the Capitol building. This is the oldest photograph known of the Capitol building, and I think it looks pretty spooky. Now I get asked what are ghosts in the definition for this purpose, and I have come up with the idea that the Capitol is filled with spirits, and we can talk about those, but some spirits arouse fear, and so that's the definition that I'm using of a ghost in the Capitol, is a spirit that arouses fear. Now, we all believe in spirits in the Capitol, democracy, and of course, freedom, which stands on top of the dome. And there's even a spirit connected with that, to Philip Reed. Now, this is probably not a photograph of Philip Reed, but these are the men who installed the Statue of Freedom on top of the Capitol, and probably Philip Reed worked with them. He is particularly famous as an enslaved man who helped create the Statue of Freedom. And he actually got his freedom while he was working on it. Slavery was abolished in Washington, D.C. While he was working on the Statue of Freedom. And so he got paid as a free man to help finish installing the statue. So his freedom was hard earned, and the spirit of freedom is more important to him than spirits are to many of us who have them as right. There's also the enslaved labor memorial in the Capitol Visitor Center. There were a lot of enslaved people who worked on the Capitol. That stone there is one of the original ones, and probably was cut by enslaved African Americans, and most likely brought to the Capitol through their labor. Several of them died in the course of building the Capitol, actually gave their lives, and there's nothing that honors them in the Capitol before this stone was put in, or even recognized their work. So this is recognizing a spirit of people whose names we don't know, but who gave their lives and gave their labor to construct the Capitol building, and they helped give the spirit of freedom to the Capitol. There are a couple of men who actually died in defending the Capitol. Officer Jacob Chestnut and John Gibson both gave their lives to defend the Capitol. In fact, they're the only two people in history ever to die in defense of the Capitol building, when an insane man attacked them in 1998 and killed them both before he was shot. There's a plaque in the Capitol, which this is a copy of, and a ceremony every year to honor these two men. So these are some of the spirits in the Capitol. Now, George Washington, of course, is honored in the Cox corridors this way. There's a kind of a spooky story about him in that we can't find the cornerstone that he laid. We know that he laid it. People were there and saw it. And the stone was laid there to honor the men who laid the foundation of the building and who were laying the foundation of our nation. And this shows that this arrow shows where they were looking for the stone and couldn't find it. That part of the building on the right there is the first part that was finished. And so in 1893, the Senate put up a plaque to honor where the cornerstone was supposed to be. They couldn't find it. And then in 1932, the Masons put up a new cornerstone, which is in that location as well. But later they realized that the whole Capitol was under construction when the cornerstone was laid. And so even though they didn't finish the wing on the left there, that is where the cornerstone would probably be. And so in 1991, you can see architect of the Capitol, George White, there standing and looking down in the hole where they're looking for the cornerstone. But they couldn't find it. They did leave the patch. You can see on the right is the patch and the concrete in the basement of the Capitol where they were looking for this cornerstone, but they weren't able to find it. Now we're going to talk about the cleaning woman that is legendary in the Capitol. There are still people, and particularly women, who go through the Capitol in the evenings and clean things up. And there was a very faithful one back in the 19th century who used a scrub brush like the woman has on the left here, and would work long hours. She wasn't paid much, but she took such pride in the Capitol that she would work far longer than she was even paid in order to keep the building clean. There are a number of people that still do that today, dedicated to keeping the building really clean, and people comment on how clean the Capitol building is when I'm giving tours. After the woman died, people said they could still hear that scrub brush going, that they could tell that her spirit was there, honoring the building and trying to keep the building clean. Now, one famous ghost is a Continental Soldier. This is the tomb that was built for George Washington underneath the crypt, right under the center of the dome. If you come in late at night, this Continental Soldier is parading up and down, guarding George Washington's body. George Washington was such a hero at the time of the Revolution that this soldier vowed that he would guard George Washington's body after he died for eternity. And he's still there because he died before they decided not to bury George Washington there. What you're seeing in this photograph is a glass case that holds the catafalque that's used in the lying in honor and lying in state ceremonies. The tomb actually looks like this, and it's hard to get to, and so you have to go through a lot of corridors and up some stairs and so forth to get there. So it's best to go late at night when the light isn't there, and then you can actually see this ghost going up and down. Now, this Continental Soldier considered heroism as a sacrifice. And in that way, he is a spirit that's haunting the Capitol. But if you think about it, it's kind of a silly thing to go on guarding a body that's not there. And it has the overtones of a cult of personality around George Washington, which was always a danger, is always a danger with leaders. And here he is spending eternity doing something, guarding a body that's not there. And so we think of him as a ghost because that's kind of a ghostly rather than a real spiritual contribution to the Capitol building. Now, the Senate used to have a barber shop in the Capitol. It's now located over in the office building, but there was a famous barber who worked there for many years, Bishop Sims. And I was pleased to see that Bishop Sims even has his own Wikipedia page these days. He died in 1930, but he was famous for the haircuts that he gave in the Capitol building, and made friends with a lot of senators. And he was on Sundays, he was a minister and had been promoted to bishop in his church. And he sang spirituals while he was cutting hair, and people would hear him singing as they went through the corridors. And later on, after he died, senators said that they could still hear him in the corridors singing there and offering spiritual counsel to the senators. So his is one of the spirits that inhabits the Capitol. But now we get to a really negative one, no question about this one. These are the bloody stairs. These are on the house side of the Capitol. And here is a picture of the blood stains on the stair. And on the left is Congressman William Talby. That's his blood staining the steps there. William Talby was a powerful personality, a big man and a dominant figure. And he was a Methodist minister that got elected to Congress from Kentucky and served a couple of terms, but he was not popular with the newspaper in Louisville, and their reporter, William Kincaid, often printed negative things about him, particularly that he was profiting from his position in Congress. And just before the third election, when he was about to be reelected again, he hoped, Kincaid published an article accusing him of infidelity, of carrying on with a government employee here in Washington. Everybody knew that his wife was back in Kentucky, and so this was embarrassing to him, and he was really unhappy about it. And so he couldn't go back to Kentucky even. He stayed here in Washington, and every once in a while he would run into Kincaid in the Capitol building. And because Kincaid was a small man and Talby was a big and gruff guy, Talby would taunt Kincaid and he would tweak his ear. That he would twist his ear and make him bow. And this is a particularly humiliating thing under the code of Southern chivalry. And Kincaid really resented this, as I would if it was done to me. And so one day, he, knowing the code, he gave the response, which is, "Sir, I am not armed." This is a challenge to a duel. He's saying, let's settle this in the honor of arms. And so Talby said, well, perhaps next time you better be. And unfortunately for Talby, the next time Talby did it, Kincaid was armed, and he pulled his gun right here at the steps and shot Talby in the face. It took Talby about a week to die, and we have never been able to get the blood out of the stairs there. And so Talby made a statement that he guessed he had asked for this response. And when Kincaid was charged with murder, he was acquitted on the grounds of having defended his honor. But today, journalists have to be careful on these stairs because William Talby's ghost is still there and will trip them if he gets a chance. And so particularly when they're in a hurry, journalists are always advised to take a different staircase going from the first floor up to this house chamber because Talby will attempt to trip them on this staircase. Now, I have been asked if there's ever been tests done to determine if this is in fact blood stains, and the answer is no, we wouldn't test that. That might spoil the story. Now, here are the Senate bathtubs. There used to be 6 of them, but now there's only a couple of them, and this is the only one that's open for people to see. Senators, even when the extensions were built with the current chambers in the 1850s, senators and congressmen lived in boarding houses near the Capitol, and they often didn't have running water and particularly didn't have bathtubs. And so one expected to go somewhere else to take a bath. There were public baths, and the Senate put in their own, and the House did as well. Now, the Senate put in these marble bathtubs, actually Carrara marble imported from India and then carved here in Washington. The House just had tin tubs, but the Senate needed something more appropriate. And so they got these marble tubs, but of course the marble cracks easily and so they can't be used anymore. But the most famous person to use these tubs was Vice President Henry Wilson. Henry Wilson was a famous senator from Massachusetts, and then was very popular and was elected vice president. So he presided over the Senate. And he particularly liked taking baths, and Harry Truman was the one who commented how terrible the vice president's job was. There wasn't anything to do except wait around for the president to die. And so Henry Wilson did a lot of time relaxing in the tub, and he often would forget that he was supposed to be, or there would be a Senate vote called, and he'd have to run back upstairs. And he was often seen pulling his clothes back on as he ran up the stairs. Now, he actually died of pneumonia, and I was able to locate this picture of him sitting in the tub. As you can see, luckily he had his clothes on, but here's a picture of Henry Wilson sitting in the tub there. He was ill while he was taking baths, and baths were not considered to be healthy at that time. And people said that he had died of pneumonia because he took too many baths. Even today, a lot of times you can hear Henry Wilson running back up, his ghost running back up to the Senate chamber and coughing of the pneumonia that he died of. Now, this is a picture of a fellow of the American Political Science Association. Unfortunately, I forgot to write down her name, but she is showing off the bathtubs there, and you can see how they are today. Now, another ghost story is about the carpenter and the brick mason. The carpenter, as you can see on the left there, was a very handsome fellow and proud, but quite young. And he carried on kind of a feud with the bricklayer, who's on the right there. And they would often get into conflict, and the carpenter was a cocky young man. The bricklayer was a surly old guy and was really irritated by the way he was treated. There's even a drawing of the two of them fighting one time. And later on, the brick mason was so angry that he knocked out the carpenter. And he had already gotten in trouble for fighting, and so he knew he was going to get in trouble and lose his job if the carpenter would charge him with it. And so he happened to be walling up a location in the corridor to the Senate's terrace rooms. And there's a place you can see where the bricks were added. And if you come by that late at night, particularly after the lights are out, people are gone, you can hear the carpenter inside still trying to scrape away the mortar behind that wall and get out. So that one's definitely a ghost. Another ghost is poor Peter Lont. He sits in the crypt, and if you come through the crypt late at night again and the lights are out, you'll often encounter his ghost because he's trying to get an appropriation out of the Congress. L'Enfant had to leave Washington after he designed the city and didn't get credit for it, and was never paid for it. He was supposed to make his money from the sale of the printed maps, but they went ahead, Thomas Jefferson, as Secretary of State, went ahead and let Andrew Ellicott print up the maps, and Ellicott put his own name on it. L'Enfant got no credit and no money. So later on in life, after he'd failed at every single thing he had tried, he came back to the Capitol. He would hang out here in the crypt and accost members of the House and Senate as they came by to try to get an appropriation. Eventually, he did get an appropriation, but he already owed more money than the appropriation, and so he didn't end up with any of the money. So he is still down there trying to get paid for his design of the Capitol, and that's certainly a spirit we can identify with as being fearful. Another one is not Benjamin Latrobe, but John Lenthal. This is the old Supreme Court chamber, and Benjamin Latrobe had designed a ceiling. You can see the ceiling there, which is very elaborate. That's a brick arch, one of the most complex brick arches ever built, and had, at the time I'm talking about, had an even wider span. They hadn't put the pillars in, and but they got it successfully built. But John Lenthal was the one who was actually the clerk of the works and in charge of the construction itself. Latrobe had taken on a lot of of a business as the first architect in the United States. And so he was doing a lot of different projects, and he wasn't here in Washington. Lenthal wrote Latrobe and told him that he thought this arch was ready to be freed of the scaffolding. And so he was going to take the scaffolding down. But Latrobe wrote him, we don't know whether Lenthal actually got the letter or not, but Latrobe wrote back and told him not to do that. He didn't think it was ready yet. But Lenthal went ahead and pulled out the supports, and the ceiling fell on him and killed him. This was greatly embarrassing to Latrobe as an architect to have one of his projects fall down. And so he designed the gravestone for John Lenthal in Rock Creek Cemetery here in Washington. So that's another sad story. And Lenthal's ghost can be seen in the old Supreme Court chamber, still trying to defend himself from the falling bricks of that wonderful arch. The second most famous ghost in the Capitol is the demon cat. And here is a shot showing where the footprints are. This is the main corridor between the rotunda and the crypt under the rotunda and the Senate wing. And in the concrete there, you can see cat footprints of the demon cat. The issue with the cats is that several guards were attacked by a particularly hostile cat, it became famous for accosting guards that were walking alone through the Capitol building. Now, we know that there actually were cats in the Capitol. This is a photograph of some of them. This is from the cafeteria in the Dirksen building. You can find this photograph on display. Now, neither of these is the demon cat because he's all black. But there were cats in the Capitol, and we know that the guards in that era were all patronage appointments. And if a guard was on the shift that was late at night when nobody was around, it was often some senator's ne'er-do-well brother-in-law who had a drinking problem. And sometimes these night watchmen would end up in a horizontal position when they thought they were in a vertical position. So one of them was laying down, but thinking he was standing up one night, and one of the cats comes up to investigate what's going on. And the guy thinks he's 5 feet in the air, and the cat is that big. And so he lashed out at the cat. He was quite frightened by this because the cat kept changing sizes and so forth. And the cat retaliated by scratching the man. And so the man had proof that he'd been attacked by the demon cat in the middle of the night there. So when his relief showed up the next morning, they knew what the issue was, and the supervisor said, "Oh, well, Joe, we'll take care of the cat, and you go home and rest up for a couple of days." Now, the supervisor knew that he couldn't fire the senator's brother-in-law, and so they just had to put up with this. But they told him that they had taken care of the demon cat. Well, history gets made because other guards discovered that if they were attacked by the demon cat, they got a couple of days off too. And this is how history gets written. So the demon cat is the one. Now, some people tell me that there's no real evidence of the demon cat, but I can show you some actual concrete evidence, because here is where he carved his initials into the concrete. This is the corridor that goes from the old Senate into the terrace. And there is where the demon cat carved his initials into the concrete there. So that is concrete proof that the demon cat exists. Another ghost is Senator Boyce Penrose of Pennsylvania.
Hey, Steve.
Senator Penrose was a very powerful senator. He was national or state chairman of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania and senator from Pennsylvania. But he was a bachelor and had a lot of time, and he had pledged to read every bill that was introduced in Congress while he was there. Now, nobody ever tries to do that anymore because there's so many bills, but Senator Penrose was concerned that some good idea might pass by. And so since he was a bachelor and didn't have much of a social life, he would spend his evenings, and he had trouble with his back, so he had a rocking chair in his hideaway office, and people could hear him in there rocking and reading these bills. Well, long after he died, they could still hear him in there rocking and reading his bills because his ghost is still in there trying to read all of the bills that have been introduced in Congress. There's another ghost who was a librarian of Congress. He was a catalog librarian, so he was in charge of knowing where all the books were. Now, this is the old library as it was in the Capitol before it moved to the current building. And at that time, they stored the books all over the Capitol building. There were huge attics and storage areas in the terraces and so forth. And so this librarian was the one that knew where all the obscure books were. Well, as he got older, he had some investments that he was concerned that somebody might break into his apartment and make off with his stocks and bonds and things. And so he began to stow them in books that he knew nobody would check out, and only he knew where they were, and so he could protect his money that way. Well, unfortunately, they built the new Library of Congress and began to move all the books over there, and they even had to invent a new library cataloging system for the Library of Congress because it was by far the largest library in the world, and the Dewey Decimal System just didn't work for them. So that's when the Library of Congress system was invented, and this poor clerk was not the only person to know where all the books were, and he was not able to get all of the bonds and stocks and money that he had hidden in these books before they got them all moved, even though it took them 3 years to move all those books. So the poor guy's ghost is still in the Capitol trying to locate all those books where he had stowed his money. And you can hear him at night rushing through the Capitol and trying to locate where he left those books. The most famous ghost of all is John Quincy Adams. This is our painting from the Cox corridors of Adams in his location in the Capitol building. Now, this was when the House was meeting in what's now Statuary Hall. And John Quincy Adams was actually elected president in that room. He's the last president to be elected by the House of Representatives because there was no majority in the Electoral College in 1824. Of course, Andrew Jackson had won the popular vote and got a majority in the Congress, and they didn't let John Quincy Adams accomplish very much. And so Adams left office, was defeated in the next election, and left office. But the people of Massachusetts wanted him here, and they elected him all the rest of his life to the House of Representatives. He had been elected, obviously, by the House as president. He had been elected senator by the state legislature in Massachusetts. But being elected to the House of Representatives, he was elected by the people, and he always considered that to be the greatest honor he had ever received. So he served 17 years in the House chamber and became famous. He was known as Old Man Eloquent. But he was sitting there at that seat when he had a stroke and was carried off into the Speaker's office where he died. Here are the members of Congress attending to him in their proper attire at his death scene in the Speaker's office. At the time that he died, he was planning to give a speech. He had it all prepared. It was attacking the giving of medals to the generals in the Mexican War. He felt that was a most unrighteous war and nobody should get a medal for serving in an unrighteous war. And his ghost is still trying to give that speech in Statuary Hall. Now, I have seen this ghost quite often. It's always in the dark, of course, and I like to go to congressional receptions and so forth. And if I go to them over on the House side or in the House office buildings, I like to walk back through the Capitol in the dark and kind of commune with the spirits. And I have seen John Quincy Adams' ghost in the House chamber. And if I have quite a bit of wine at the reception, I can be sure of seeing that ghost. And it's a ghost because he was not able to prevail on this issue, and his death is a tragedy. Now, also in Statuary Hall is a famous legend that I can put an end to. The legend is that those statues in Statuary Hall get down off their pedestals on New Year's Eve and they dance. But this is obviously absurd because in that room is Frances Willard, the first woman honored in Statuary Hall. and for decades, the only woman honored there. She is famous as the founder and president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Now, she knew fully well that dancing leads to drinking. And so she disapproved of dancing, and she certainly would not allow it in Statuary Hall. So it might have gone on before her statue got there, but you can bet it does not now, because Frances Willard would put an end to that. There are two ghosts related to busts of the speakers. On the left is Joe Canon, who was the most powerful speaker in congressional history. And in particular, he kept the appointment of senators and committees in his own power. And so if he didn't like what a committee was doing, he would just appoint another one and put a freshman in charge who would do what he's told. And so he was referred to as Czar Canon. And he liked to make a joke about that. When he was going to announce something that he knew was going to infuriate the people that opposed him, he'd say, "We are about to perpetrate the following outrage." Well, this led to the election of the first speaker ever elected by the minority, and his name is Champ Clark. And Champ Clark is the only one elected from the minority. He was a Democrat, but he was elected with just enough Republican votes to defeat Joe Cannon. And this humiliated Joe Cannon, but not enough to get him to leave Congress. So Cannon is one of the few speakers to stay in Congress after he was defeated. And he did everything he could to block anything that Champ Clark tried to do. And if you come through those corridors late at night after the lights are turned down and there's not much noise, you can often hear the two of them still squabbling because their busts got placed next to each other in the hallway of the Canon of the House of Representatives, just outside the chamber. Then there's one ghost to which I lay claim. I'm the only one that's ever mentioned having seen him, but I still see him a lot. This is Wilbur Mills. Now, Wilbur Mills was considered the most powerful member of Congress. He was a member from Arkansas, and he was chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and he was famous for never losing a vote on the House floor. He always counted his votes. And he had a particular place that he liked to stand because members would come to him to talk about particular issues relating to taxation and health that fall under the Ways and Means Committee. And so he was a very sought out member, and he would just stand outside the House Ways and Means Committee room. Here he is in a photograph in that location, greeting a couple of new members of the Ways and Means Committee who'd just been elected. So he is very powerful and well known. And when I first started working around the Congress in the 1960s, he was still chairman, and I would see him in that location. And to this day, I still see Wilbur Mills in that location when I go by. Now, later on, his chief of staff wrote a biography of him, and she talked about it at the Capitol Historical Society. So I asked her about this and if anyone else had seen this ghost, and she wasn't even aware that there was a spot where Wilbur Mills had stood. Now, she was in charge much later than when I was there, and so it may be that he had stopped doing that, but she wasn't even aware of the location. So I am probably the only one that actually sees Wilbur Mills' ghost there. Now, why do I call it a ghost when he was a spirit? Well, this is a picture of Wilbur Mills and his neighbor. This is not the woman he was married to. And one night he was in his limousine speeding and was pulled over by the police. And his neighbor here was concerned that she was going to be caught with him. She knew she wasn't supposed to, and she jumped into the tidal basin. The police were able to retrieve her, but this was kind of the end of Wilbur Mills' career. It's kind of a sad ending, and that is because this is her working uniform. She was a lady whose business was taking off that uniform, and so this did not help Wilbur Mills' reputation, and he left under a cloud, an unfortunate situation. Her name, she was known popularly as Fanny Fox, and you might hear that name still around. So I want to mention a couple of books that discuss ghosts. One is Dan Brown's Lost Symbol. And this, it talks about a secret chamber in the Capitol building. I can tell you that chamber actually did exist, but it was not used as for ceremonies by the Masons, as Dan Brown claims. In fact, Dan Brown didn't even learn about the secret chamber until after it was abolished. But I also want to talk about the Welcome to Washington, Fina Mendoza, because this is a book in which Fina Mendoza, a congressman's daughter, actually encounters the demon cat, and so this is the continuing existence of the demon cat in literature. We sell the demon cat book. We sell the Fina Mendoza book there, and you can order that off our website. Now, I took a picture of myself doing the research for this. Wait a minute, where's it gone? Oh, the ghosts have taken the picture of me doing the research for this. I am just speechless. Jane, do we have any questions?
We have so many questions. Let me try to quickly put them to you. There are several questions about the picture of the carpenter and the bricklayer. And people want to know, where is that picture, that they might see it? And is it true that the bricklayer actually covered the carpenter up with bricks and buried him alive?
Well, first of all, of course, that picture comes off the internet. You can get almost anything you want on the internet. It's the replacement for Alice's Restaurant. So that's the first issue. And as to whether it really happened or not, some of you might recognize that as the plot to Edgar Allan Poe's The Cast of Amontillado. But it occurred to me one day when I saw that wall and I heard this scraping noise, and I thought, yep, that's got to be a carpenter back there.
There's a story that there's a ghost of Lincoln. That haunts the Capitol periodically, right around S-219.
That particular one I do not know. I know that Lincoln showed up at an investigating committee meeting one time in the Capitol. It's one of the only times a president ever testified before the Congress. The Senate had convened a committee meeting to investigate Mrs. Lincoln, whose brothers-in-law were serving the Confederate Army, and one of them's wife was living in the White House. And Lincoln heard about the investigation and went to the Senate, and they deferred to him, let him testify first, and he simply said, "I will vouch for Mrs. Lincoln's loyalty." And so the senators were embarrassed and left. And so if Lincoln's ghost is there, I'm sure it has to do with that encounter with the Senate, because Lincoln, of course, served in the House of Representatives and not in the Senate.
The Library of Congress conversation. Where was the Library of Congress when it was in the Capitol, and what's there now?
The Library of Congress was the wing that sticks out toward the mall. It was added after the Capitol was designed because the Congress had purchased Thomas Jefferson's library, which was too large for the room that they were using for a library at that point. So it was almost the entire wing, at least of the upper floors, that sticks out toward the mall from the rotunda. It is now occupied on the south by the Speaker's office and on the north by a number of hideaway offices, I think, including the President Pro Tem of the Senate and several other people there. Then they added another floor above it out of the space. The room was 2 stories high, and they added space there. And then the rooms on the end, most of that part of the building eventually ended up as the Library of Congress. In fact, I think we've even scheduled a lunch bites later on to talk about that, exactly that.
Well, maybe then we can also ask, are there any other ghosts from the Library of Congress that have slipped into the new buildings? And then someone wanted to know, Henry Wilson was whose vice president? He was Grant's vice president.
I believe he was Grant's vice president, yes.
And then a couple people asked, questions that I think is a broader question is, when would are there evening tours available? Right now we don't have, the Capitol is closed for visitors, and so we can't do tours. We do evening tours for people who are members and supporters of the Capitol Historical Society. There was a question about a ghost tour for staff, and all of those are the kind of things that we absolutely do. So when the Capitol reopens, those possibilities are there, but we have to abide by the public health guidelines. And so stay tuned. We are glad to know that there's interest, and we will certainly follow through.
Yes, I have had the problem that whenever I let it be known that I do ghost tours, I get overwhelmed with people, and so I have to be very quiet about about these ghosts, because I know that they will be very popular. And obviously, we've got a whole lot more people here today than I've had on any of these other webinars.
Someone was asking some more about the Dan Brown book and that secret chamber. Where was that secret chamber, and what was it used for?
Yes, the secret chamber was underneath the front steps, and it was part of the extension of the Capitol, which was done in 1958 to 62. My understanding, and I should say, I started giving tours of the Capitol in 65, so it wasn't too long after that. And my understanding was that when they first put television cameras in the Capitol for security reasons, they actually hired people to sit and look at them. And so there were all these little cubicles down there that were used for security, but my guess is they found out pretty quickly that that's a way to go to sleep. And so they don't actually watch those TV cameras anymore. I don't think we had the capability of taping as well at that time, but at any rate, they were not used for anything by the time they were torn down. And the way everybody found out about them was that there's some books stored in there, and somebody looked at some of the books, and it was one particular leather-bound book, and they flipped it open, and it had John Adams' signature on the Senate payroll. John Adams was vice president, and this was the Senate payroll, and somebody had gotten this out of the archives and not returned it, and it ended up in this storeroom in the Capitol. And there was so much publicity about that Dan Brown read about it, but they didn't do the publicity until after the whole thing was torn down. But it did not in any way resemble the description of it in Dan Brown's book.
Somebody asked about the bloody steps, and they understand that Kincaid got off on self-defense. So does that mean that Talby had a weapon when that happened? Do you know?
No, it means that Talby had assaulted Kincaid's honor. And that particular concept still exists and is called stand your ground. And we've had several cases about it recently. So it is a concept that still exists and is in some state laws. And of course, it's always being proposed that a man has a right to stand up for himself. And so, in fact, it did exist, and that was the grounds on which Kincaid was acquitted. That basically that Talby deserved it.
Got it. Now, Fergus Bordwich, one of our great historians, wants to know, has anyone ever seen the ghost of Senator Lester Hunt? He's heard that he might be haunting around.
Yes, Senator Hunt, I believe, killed himself in the Russell office building, and probably the ghost is there. I have not. I don't get to go through the Russell building late at night after I've had a lot of wine, and so I haven't seen it. But thanks to Fergus and his wife, we know which room this took place in, since she's written a play about it, and that's certainly worth investigating. This was a 1950s incident, but it became the basis of the book Advice and Consent.
And remind us again, someone wants to know, where was it that Wilbur Mills stood? He stood outside the committee room?
He stood outside the House Ways and Means Committee, which is right off the House chamber. It is in the northeast corner of the south extension of the Capitol. It's probably the most prestigious committee room in the Capitol. And it's that corner just outside the door, which is just a few steps off the House floor. And that is where I always saw Wilbur Mills.
And can you tell us, have the ghosts ever been seen on the security tapes, or are they managed to evade that?
I don't have access to the security tapes.
Well,
I'm quite sure that they're there.
Of course. What about the Congressional Cemetery? How does that relate to the Capitol?
Well, Congressional Cemetery was the semi-official cemetery before Arlington Cemetery was established. And the Congress used to vote to put a cenotaph, that is a gravestone with no body under it necessarily, for every member of Congress who died. And so you can see them. There I've forgotten, over 100, I believe, cenotaphs in Congressional Cemetery today. I was just walking through it a couple of weeks ago, and they all look really nice there. They've cleaned up the cemetery and restored a lot of the tombstones just since I've been in Washington. So that is a place where you see a lot of ghosts, and they, in fact, so many that they have to shut the cemetery at night to keep people from getting injured by the ghosts. But it actually is probably the most expensive dog park in the world. People pay a lot of money to be able to walk their dogs in Congressional Cemetery because it's so prestigious, and you meet so many people and often end up in social activities with them. So that's a great place to walk your dog if you're a single in Washington, D.C., is join the Congressional Cemetery Dog Walkers Association. But there are lots of ghosts there, people buried there. Commodore Tingy, the man who was in charge of the Navy Yard at the time the British attacked in 1814, is buried there. J. Edgar Hoover is buried there. Leonard Matlovich, the famous advocate for gay members of the military.
Well,
and, John Philip Sousa is probably the most famous person buried there. He actually grew up in that neighborhood. So there are lots of ghosts there. I don't have a dog, so I don't have.
Well, and I understand there's a 2-year wait to be admitted to that dog. It's a very complex. So we're coming to our 1 o'clock moment. This is always the challenge, because Steve, you've got so much interesting information, and we've got such great questions. And so let me just sort of close with a moment that we always have this great audience. They come up. So Peggy Higgins reports that following the Wilbur Mills incident, a songwriter friend of hers wrote a song about it and performed, and the chorus was, "She may only be a stripper from the Silver Slipper, but she has her ways and means."
I love that.
So
Thank you,
Peggy, we invite you to send us a clip of that song so that for the next time we tell this story, we will have a little bit of audio to go with it. And a couple people asked, will you be informed of the next Lunch Bites? Yes, you will. Now that you've registered, you can be on our mailing list, and we resume our Lunch Bite series, which are interesting, fascinating stories about the Capitol and the Capitol Hill neighborhood that we do every other week. And it is led by Steve and his friends. Steve has an amazing group of friends who are lovers of the Capitol in different ways. And so we provide this as a fun activity as we are all trying to deal with the quarantine activities where we meet by Zoom rather than in person. And so we thank you for participating. We thank you for your support. And Steve, you are a rare treasure. Thank you for your stories. And we will all imagine Halloween when the ghosts all come out for All Saints Day. So thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Keep it up. Take care. Be well. Bye.